let's delve into the final chapter of Black Myth Wukong, Chapter 6, which takes place on Mount Huaguo, the birthplace of the Monkey King. As always, we'll be starting with the minor, unrelated bosses and work our way up to the major bosses that tend to have more to do with each other's stories. There's no dragon boss that we'll be omitting in this chapter, but there is still a frog boss just like all the other chapters before named Long Bao Ba, which we'll have to return to in a later video. However, there is still a very minor unrelated dragon Yaoguai chief boss known as the Jiaolong of Waves, which will be the first boss that we dive into. The Jiaolong, or Jiao Dragon, is an ancient real-life water-dwelling mythological creature that has been mentioned thousands of years ago in ancient Chinese texts. Many historians believe it to have originally been an alligator or crocodile, as it typically is described as being a hornless, scaled, water-dwelling dragon. According to both the Jiaolong's real-life history and the description we're given in-game, it is believed to have the ability to make the fish under its domain fly, which is cool. The game also describes it as a protective deity of the waters, while also implying that a human can actually turn into a Jiaolong if taught how, as it tells the story of a fisherman from the village of Chen who actually did meet a Jiaolong that was the protector deity of the heaven-reaching river that their village bordered. After asking the Long to teach him its ways so that he could more easily catch fish, by causing them to fly. Soon afterwards, the fisherman turned into a Jiaolong himself, after which he dove into the water, never to be seen by his village again. This means that the Jiaolong of Waves we face in-game could be this very same ex-fisherman in the story, or it could just be another Jiaolong river deity, since apparently there are multiple. Either way, it was a neat little fight to experience that kind of popped up out of nowhere. Next, let's talk about another rather unique boss that's actually 4 different bosses that are all the same, known as the Poison Chiefs, who are each Yaoguai chiefs. This is another boss that's unique to the game, which means we only have its in-game journal entry to go off of for an explanation. According to its entry, the Poison Chief is actually a result of 2 different Yaoguais that combined into one for survival. The story goes that after Erlang Shen and his mighty axe defeated Sun Wukong atop Mount Huaguo, either the first time way back when in the novel or this recent time at the beginning of the game, his axe broke off a cliffside rock that had absorbed the wisdom of the universe for countless ages, causing it to become sentient. However, there was also a great tree that fell alongside the cliff rock, but unlike the rock, the tree was uprooted and was about to die. In desperation, the tree asked the rock if it would be so kind as to allow the tree to just attach its roots to the rock's body in order to live just for a few days, which the rock reluctantly agreed to. The tree ended up absolutely taking advantage of its rock partner and grew its roots into every crack and crevice, causing the rock guai great pain and even leading to the rock to try to remove the tree forcefully, though it was never able to do so since at this point the tree's removal would break the rock itself apart, killing them both. The 2 Yaoguais hated one another, and eventually their conjoined hateful existence began to emit toxins, which the tree used to prey upon the living. This also inadvertently ended up benefiting the rock guai, and thus the 2 of them sort of formed an alliance. And I can only assume the story is true of all 4 poison chiefs found in Chapter 6. The next boss to talk about would be yet another group of enemies in Chapter 6, although only one of them is powerful enough to be called a Yaoguai chief. They are known as the Waterwood Beasts. Similarly to the Poison Chief backstory, the Waterwood Beast is also unique to the game and is also a natural material turned Yaoguai, in that the Yaoguai chief was originally a giant 1,000-year-old camphor tree that was able to absorb an entire millennia's worth of wisdom from the universe. One day, a natural disaster, which I can only assume would be an earthquake, uprooted it, and it fell into a river. However, due to its massive size, it just kinda sat in one place. Eventually, some nearby villagers wanted to haul it away for lumber, but all of a sudden, when it was approached, it turned into a giant 4-legged hippo-looking beast that would fling anyone who got too close with ill intentions into the water, making the villagers fearful of the Waterwood Beast. Strangely though, when children would play in the river, the beast would not harm them, and would instead even use its branches to help out the children when they would struggle in the water, preventing them from ever drowning. The villagers came to understand its good but touchy nature and desire to just be left alone, and thus eventually dubbed it the Waterwood Beast. There was even a passing Taoist one day that called out to the beast from the waterside, asking if it wanted to leave its river and go find the others of its kind, which did exist, but the beast had no response. After 2 years of living in this river, an especially rainy season came around and the river started to overflow. In response, the waterwood beast began thrashing and smashing against the edges of the river, frightening the villagers so much that it scared them all out of their village, running away to a nearby one, thinking the waterwood beast had finally snapped and was going to kill them all. However, that night, after the village was emptied of its people, the overflowing river flooded the village and destroyed everything, revealing that the waterwood beast was really just trying to save all of the villagers from their sure watery deaths. When they returned, the beast was nowhere to be found. Because of the grandeur nature of a 1,000-year-old camphor tree-turned Yaoguai, and the fact that there are other waterwood beasts but there's only one Yaoguai chief waterwood beast, personally I like to assume that the beast from the story is in fact the same one as the hippo boss we fight in-game, although that's not explicitly confirmed as there are clearly many different waterwood beasts. The next boss we'll talk about is yet another familiar face, or rather a familiar name, and that is the Son of Stones, a Yaoguai chief. You may recall that I had mistakenly covered this boss in the Chapter 2 video along with the Father of Stones, the latter of which actually appeared in Chapter 5 and was covered accurately in the Chapter 5 video. For more information on the backstory of the entire Stone Guai family and the Yellow Wind Ridge that they all came from, which is consequently where 90% of the story regarding the Son of Stones is, please feel free to check out the Chapter 2 and 5 videos after we're done here. Just remember that the actual identity of the Son of Stones is this boss in Chapter 6. That being said, the only real thing we have left to explain about the Son of Stones would be that he did indeed set off to search for his father, the appropriately named Father of Stones, after the father had left the cave in search of Princess Ironfan of the Flaming Mountains. It was the Mother of Stones herself who tasked her son with finding the father because she couldn't go herself because her son could not be left alone to govern their mountain because he was not of age. And before her son set off, she gave him a large portion of her essence. However, while the Father of Stones had set off marching westward towards the Flaming Mountains, the Son of Stones mistakenly started marching east, and eventually ended up all the way on the east coast of China, at the Flower Fruit Mountain, also known as Mount Huaguo. Until now, he had been searching every mountain he came across looking for old dad, but once he got to Wukong's mountain, everything was so pretty that he eventually completely forgot about his quest and ended up spending his days sitting alongside a ridge, watching a giant locust jump around, clapping his hands in delight until eventually being put down by the Destined One. For no real reason, to be honest. And that actually ends the entire story of the Stone Guais of Yellow Wind Ridge. Unfortunately, none of them have very happy endings, and I still can't think of very many reasons why we actually killed any of them, but anyway. Chapter 6 has one more Stone Yaoguai boss though. In fact, it is the literal largest Stone Guai in the game and one of the largest bosses overall. The Giant Shigandang is a Yaoguai king boss that is incredibly similar yet unrelated entirely to the Shigandang of Yellow Wind Ridge. The Giant Shigandang was actually formed from the leftovers of the very same stone that produced the egg that made the Monkey King long ago, which we'll get to when talking about Wukong himself. The leftover divine stone continually absorbed the essences of the sun and moon for another millennia following the great sage's birth, which I guess in a way makes the giant Shigandang the sibling of Sun Wukong. Anyway, this giant stone dude was incredibly powerful, but one day, not long after its emergence, somebody who has yet to officially be revealed but is totally not Bodhisattva Luigi placed a fleshy Buddha head on the body of the giant Shigandang. Very similar to what happened in the Yellow Wind Ridge regarding the smaller Shigandang, which, just like the latter, started to try to take over the enormous Stone Guai before too long. The Buddha head absorbed the will of the giant Shigandang, which led to the Yaoguai king burrowing into the ground, trying to absorb whatever essence he could find, which in this case was the essence of the earth itself, which unfortunately just ended up leading to the Buddha head absorbing all of the essence that the giant Shigandang was absorbing, causing lots of the flowers and greenery of the surrounding mountains to fade and wither and all living things to die, which was kind of a problem, leading to the barren, dry look of the area surrounding the monster. Meanwhile, the Buddha head that was feasting away on all this lovely will was developing a skanda of consciousness within. What's a skanda, you ask? Well, in a nutshell, a skanda is the Buddhist term for the aggregate essences that make up a person or entity's psychophysical makeup. The Buddhist scriptures known as the Pali Canon describe the 5 skandhas as form, feeling, thought, choice, and finally, consciousness. If you've played the game, you'll probably recall that all 5 skandhas appear one by one in each chapter, each time in a physical form as an eye of a fleshy Buddha head, implying very strongly that these Buddha heads are each trying to absorb will and become sentient through whatever means necessary. But I will say their maker is still unknown, even if it is likely Lingji. Anyway, long story short, the giant Shigandong existed like this, possessed by the Buddha head until the Destined One is able to hurt it enough to climb up its arm and witness a very odd encounter between the Buddha head and a mandrill, who you might remember we've already seen in pretty much every chapter, always popping up near one of the Buddha heads but running away right before we can approach her. The mandrill chief is actually one of the 4 original chief monkeys of Wukong that we'll talk about a bit later, as well as the very first monkey Wukong ever set eyes on, meaning she was quite literally the Monkey King's oldest friend, who is still alive as an immortal for reasons we will also explain later. She was saddened by Wukong's death, and after he transformed back into the celestial stone egg atop Mount Huaguo, she was told in a dream that if she were to collect all 5 skandhas, she might be able to revive the spirit within the divine stone, soon Wukong himself. This is why we witness the mandrill popping up throughout the chapters, searching for the skandhas, which I suppose could mean that she was actually the one who planted the Buddha heads on the Shigandongs, but that's just a guess. After the mandrill chief argues with the final Buddha head for a bit, she rips the head's eye, also known as the skandha of consciousness, out, killing the head, then takes her first actual prolonged look at the Destined One, which then makes her realize something. Something that makes her entire plan pointless, which, if you couldn't tell by now what that is, we'll get to that later on in the video. She then tosses the Destined One the skandha, then runs off for one final time, after which the Destined One can give all 5 skandhas to Zhu Dog for the creation of the 5 skandhas pill. After the entire encounter, the giant Shigandong, who is now freed from the Buddha head possession, burrows into the ground for a nice, long, well-deserved nap. Hey, at least that's one stone guy we don't have to actually kill. Next up, let's wrap up the explanations of the minor bosses by talking about the final group of 4 Yaoguai chiefs, which are all the Yaoguai forms of 1 piece each of the legendary Wukong's armor following his death. Well, all except for 1. The Feng-tail General, which is the giant locust hopping around the place that I mentioned earlier that possibly was once a mount for human transport, judging by the man-made structures attached to its sides and legs, was simply merged with Wukong's headpiece, known as the Golden Feng-tail Crown. Now, the reason I'm not saying these armor pieces originated from these Yaoguais is because Wukong originally obtained each of these armor pieces not from random Yaoguais hopping around the place, but long ago in the novel Journey to the West from the 4 Dragon Kings of the Oceans, Ao Kuang and his brothers, Ao Run, Ao Shun, and Ao Qin, with Ao Qin, the Dragon King of the Southern Ocean, providing the Golden Feng-tail Crown. And by the way, Feng is the Chinese word for phoenix, meaning those plumes on the headpiece are actually phoenix feathers and have nothing to do with the locust. Anyway, after Wukong was killed at the beginning of the game, his armor was stripped off of his body, and the headpiece was merged somehow with the Feng-tail General, who was a locust that the game describes as having a touch of the Monkey King's cleverness, always leaping away from powerful foes. This is why it obtained the headpiece, which represented Wukong's mind and wit. The next armor guai boss would be the Gold Armored Rhino, which the game describes as a Yaoguai that literally is Wukong's gold Suosa chess piece, originally given to him by the Dragon King of the Western Ocean, Ao Run, having gained enlightenment in and of itself and transforming into an armored rhinoceros, constantly charging forward fearlessly, unafraid and undeterred by pain and suffering. This represents Wukong's unparalleled suffering that he endured in his lifetime, which is not limited to but includes being melted, crushed underneath a mountain, beheaded, having his head squeezed by the golden circlet until it almost resembled the shape of a gourd, stabbed, slashed, hacked, drowned, and much, much more. However, through it all, Wukong pushed forward, at first to achieve his own ends and the ends of his fellow monkeys, but then to achieve his heaven-sent mission of guiding Monk Sunzong and the others to Mount Lingshan and back, and now to achieve freedom from his heavenly oppressors. The next armor guai boss is another that evolved from its corresponding armor piece, and that would be the Cloud Treading Deer, which is the Yaoguai form of the Lotus Silk Cloud Treader boots, originally given to Wukong by Ao Shun, dragon god of the Northern Ocean, The character of Wukong that this boss represents is a bit more nuanced, but in a nutshell speaks to Wukong's two-sided character more than anything. What I mean by that is that Wukong is on the surface a mischievous, free-spirited monkey who dances around at his whim, but when pushed, turns into a much more conniving, destructive, enormously dangerous being, capable of feats that seem to have limitless potential. This is proven in Wukong's life by his relatively harmless character when he was the Monkey King around his monkey denizens of Flower Fruit Mountain, as opposed to the very ruthless character he took on when assisting Monk Sunzong on the journey to the west, where he proved to be more than capable of killing, kidnapping, stealing, arson, and the total destruction of entire settlements. The cloud-treading deer also represents this by going through a dramatic transformation mid-fight, when it becomes literally blood-bathed and much more dangerous. The final armor guy would be the Emerald-Armed Mantis, which is yet again the literal enlightened embodiment of Wukong's Diansui long-soaring bracers, which do not make an appearance in the novel and as such the game describes as unknown to the world. The bracers represent by far the darkest piece of Wukong's history, and that is his merciless punishment of evil that he had to do with his own two hands. Just like the vicious nature of the mantis, Wukong viciously punished those that heaven would have him punish, without any second guessing or questioning, and sometimes he did it in seemingly cruel and irredeemable ways. The journal entry even recounts several novel-accurate accounts of this cruelty, such as when Wukong mercilessly ordered Jubaja and Sha Wujing to kill the yellow-robed demon's children by throwing them to their deaths in order to taunt the demon into battle to be subdued. The yellow-robed demon actually ended up being the Wood Wolf Star constellation in disguise that had left his post in heaven for the love of a woman, and was then punished by the Jade Emperor for his crimes against heaven, proving that Wukong's actions, though merciless, were the direct result of his obedience to the strict and unwavering Jade Emperor himself, and his desire to do right by the will of the heavenly court. With all of the minor bosses explained away, it's finally time to start tackling the biggest boss characters in the game, the 4 Heavenly Kings, Erlang Shen and his Plum Mountain brothers, the Supreme Inspector, and finally the one and only broken shell of the Great Sage, the Stone Monkey Sun Wukong himself, who is the boss that we'll use to piece the stories of all the other main bosses together. But just so that everything is nice and streamlined, let's start by giving each of these main bosses an introduction, beginning with the 4 Heavenly Kings, also known simply as the Great Kings, who appear both in the novel and the game as enormously gigantic, colossal, humanoid beings that are technically bosses in the Chapter 3 area, technically accessible after Chapter 5 and before Chapter 6, but we'll just assume that they're Chapter 6 bosses for this video since their appearance has so much to do with the true ending of the game. If you've ever seen a Buddhist temple or structure, chances are you've seen depictions of the very same 4 Heavenly Kings, since they are the 4 ancient, incredibly powerful gods or devas that span several mythologies such as Hindu and Buddhist. And there are so many pop culture references and historical findings to go over regarding these ancient gods, but I'll keep it as brief as possible for this video. In a nutshell of a nutshell, each of the kings guards one cardinal direction of the world, influences or governs key concepts in the world, has control over a group of spirit beings or Yaoguais that are their followers, and are said to have a 500-year lifespan, with each of their days equivalent to about 50 years in human time, meaning they live about, 9 million years or so, no big deal. Now, modern-day Buddhism is multicultural, so if you look up the Great Kings, you'll see many different names for these ancient giants. But since Wukong's legend applies primarily to his Chinese origins, we will only focus on their Chinese names here. The Heavenly King of the North is called Duo Wen, and his name means the one who hears everything. He is typically depicted with the colors yellow or green, wielding his iconic umbrella, which represents safeguarding the mind and maintaining purity and clarity. Now, his followers historically have been the Yaksha, although I'm not sure if this is still the case in the game since the Yaksha seem to have a specific origin story that hasn't been fully delved into just yet. All we really know is that heaven destroyed them all. Moving on though, the Heavenly King of the West is called Guangmu, and his name means the wide-seeing, or in other words, the one who sees everything. He's depicted with the color red, and he actually doesn't wield a weapon like the others, but rather has a snake or red cord as the symbol of constant change in the world, just as a snake sheds its skin. In the game, he summons a serpentine dragon Shen to fight against the Destined One, and his followers are a group of spirits called the Nagas, which are human-serpent hybrids that can take either form or are sometimes depicted as being both. And yes, this is the clear motivation behind the Naga race in the Warcraft universe, and some of Warcraft's most famous characters like Queen Ashara, though they used to be the Kaldorei or the Night Elves, and man, now I really want to cover Warcraft lore. That is one of my favorite franchises. Anyway, the Heavenly King of the East is called Qi Guo, and his name means upholding the country, or realm, and he influences and is considered the god of music. And as such, his weapon or symbol is very appropriately the pipa, which is a Chinese instrument similar to a lute, and he is depicted with the color white. His followers are a group of male nature spirits known as the Gandharvas, which can fly through the air and produce heavenly music. It is also said that Qi Guo's music has influenced many beings to turn towards Buddhism. The final great king governs the south and is called Zhangzhang, and his name means progress or growth, and consequently he is responsible for the concept of growth in the world. His color is blue, and his weapon is the first one that's actually a weapon, it's just a straight up sword. His followers are known as the Kambandas, which are quite literally just little dwarf-like spirits that are apparently pretty low ranking as far as Yaoguais are concerned. Now, the Great Kings serve the ultimate god of all devas, known as Sakra, who takes on many names but in Chinese mythology is the Jade Emperor himself, which is why they appear in the novel to fight against Sun Wukong when the heavens wanted to subdue the Wild Monkey King, which again we'll return to when discussing Wukong's story. The next boss to cover would be the Supreme Inspector, who appears in the game as a high-ranking military officer in the Heavenly Court that serves as the right hand of the Jade Emperor, literally, as well as being loyal to who I can only assume is Lao Tzu. And for more on that conspiracy, check out the Chapter 4 video. And just in case you missed it, yes, his head was literally turned into a right hand to signify that he is the right hand of the Jade Emperor, which is pretty gnarly. Anyway, if you look at his Chinese name in the game, it reads as Wang Lingwan, which roughly translates to Spirit Officer Wang. This implies very strongly that he appeared in the novel as the heavenly officer known as the Spirit or Numinous Officer Wang, who in the novel is also the aide to the Jade Emperor. Although in the novel, there is nothing that states he had wings or a hand for a head, and his weapon of choice is actually a whip instead of the rod thing that he uses in-game. But we'll just chalk that up to there being a lengthy time lapse between the ending of the novel and the game. Maybe he thought Wukong's rod was pretty cool, who knows. But that's about all there is to know about the Supreme Inspector. His character is a little two-dimensional. The final character to introduce before tying them all together with Wukong's story would be that of the sacred divinity himself, the first boss of the game and ex-enemy / secret ally of the Monkey King, Erlang Shen. Erlang is another rather famous Chinese mythological hero who is known for being strong, heroic, and sporting that third eye on his forehead that grants him the spiritual ability to see through deceptions and lies. Kind of like Wukong's fiery eyes, but we'll get to those later. Erlang actually has two possible backstories depending on what legend you're referencing, but for the purposes of the Journey of the West and by extension the game Black Myth Wukong, his original name is Yang Jian, and he's actually the son of the Jade Emperor's sister, the goddess known as Princess Yaoji. Yaoji was a celestial being who lived with her brother, the Jade Emperor, in heaven as the goddess of desire in heaven. But she's much more of a wet blanket than she sounds like, because her job was to limit the mortal urges of the celestial beings, such as their natural desires for romance or greed or ambition, since all of those urges were strictly forbidden for all celestial beings. One day, there was an imprisoned dragon who had broken free from its heavenly imprisonment and fled down to the earth, which prompted Yaoji to pursue. However, when in the mortal world, the dragon injured her heart, but a mortal scholar known as Yang Tianyou offered to her his own heart in order to save hers. And wouldn't you know it, the two of them fell in love with one another and got married. Soon after that, they had 3 children together, Yang Jiao, Yang Jian, who we know as Erlang Shen, and Yang Chan. However, as I mentioned before, romance is completely forbidden for celestial beings, and eventually the Jade Emperor discovered his sister's marriage to a mortal man, no less, and decided to send the heavenly armies to kill not only Yang Tianyou, but the half-blood children, who were all his own nephews and nieces. Their father Yang Tianyou was killed, as was his firstborn son, Yang Jiao, leaving only Erlang Shen, who was 3 years old at the time, and his sister, Yang Chan. Their mother, Princess Yaoji, was captured and imprisoned underneath an entire mountain known as Mount Tai for the crime of falling in love, leaving her remaining children to fend for themselves. As Erlang grew, though, he learned that he was naturally incredibly powerful since he was, part god, and could see through evil spirits with his third eye. So he trained in martial arts under the golden god Yuding Genjen, and acquired the very same 72 transformation spell that Wukong is proficient in. And eventually he obtained his famous three-pointed two-edged spear called the Sanjian Langren Shang that he primarily fights with in the game, as well as his mountain-cleaving axe and demon-slaying sword. One day, when he was older, he learned of his mother's fate and became furious. In his wrath, he became determined to free her, so he visited Mount Tai and quite literally cleaved the mountain in two using his giant axe in order to save his mother from underneath its weight. His power was so immense that not many celestial beings could or would dare to ever oppose him. And when we see him in Journey to the West, he's been pretty much left to his own devices, living in his cave at the mouth of a river known as the River of Libations, along with his sworn brothers of Plum Mountain, who together with Erlang form a fraternity group of 7, very similar to Wukong's group of 7 Yaogui sages. And 5 of Erlang's brothers actually make an appearance in the game, 1 in each chapter. The novel gives us their names of Kang, Zhang, Yao, Li, Guo Shen, and Ji Jian. Although I'm not sure which is which in the game, as even their Chinese names sound nothing like their names from either novel Journey to the West or Investiture of the Gods. Erlang also at some point came across a black stray dog and felt a connection with it immediately, taking it in and teaching it spells in order for it to cultivate immortality and stay with him forever. He named his new trusty companion Zhao Tianquan, and together the two of them became like family and were seldom ever seen separated from one another, and they fought and defeated many demons together. Now that all of the characters have been introduced, it's time to finally tie it all together by explaining the last boss of the entire game. And I hope you don't mind, but I'm gonna delve into not full detail, but a decent amount of detail regarding the full life story of Sun Wukong. A lot of which I have no animation skills for, meaning this will be mostly a listening portion with very little edited on the screen. So please forgive me for that. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor and excitement that I bring to you the story of the Monkey King himself, based on the novel Journey to the West. Once upon a time, many hundreds of years ago, there was a divine stone atop the famous and beautiful Flower Fruit Mountain, home to many different kinds of flora and fauna that lived together in peace. This celestial stone had remained on the mountain since the creation of the world, and the entire time was nourished by the seeds of heaven above and earth below, soaking up the essences of the sun and moon. One day, by the divine inspiration of the universe, it cracked open and gave birth to a stone egg. Once the winds had blown upon the egg, it was formed into a stone monkey, with arms and legs, that looked around and laid eyes on a curious female mandrill who approached the newborn stone monkey curiously. The baby observed the mandrill and mimicked her movements, figuring out how to crawl and run and climb trees. However, since this was no ordinary monkey but rather a divine creation with heaven and earth itself as his parents, a strange power emitted from the monkey's eyes in the forms of beams of light. Or laser beams, if you prefer. These beams followed the monkey's vision as he glanced around and even reached the Jade Emperor himself, sitting far above in the cloud palace of heaven. The Emperor inquired as to what the source of the beams were, and 2 of his captains gazed down upon the mortal realm and identified the stone monkey, saying that the light beams were about to fade away since the monkey will soon be eating and drinking and that it was of no concern. The Jade Emperor then dismissed the entire affair and returned to his business of whatever he was doing previously. The mandrill then decided to take the little stone monkey into the forest with her to meet the other monkeys. And so it was that the stone monkey's first days were spent running and leaping and climbing all about the mountain alongside his fellow monkeys, eating grass and shrubs and befriending all sorts of wildlife, like the monkeys and tigers and lizards and wolves and leopards. One especially hot morning, they were all playing together under the shade of some trees to beat the heat, then decided to go bathe in the nearby mountain stream. However, they noticed that the stream was, streaming, flowing, and the monkeys thought to themselves that they'd like to figure out where the source came from. So leaping and bounding and laughing and having such a fun time, they scrambled all the way up the mountain alongside the stream until they discovered a huge waterfall as its source, which became known as Water Curtain Cave. The water was beautiful, but very powerful, and before too long the monkeys started to challenge one another, saying that if any of them had the ability and courage to enter the powerful waterfall without being harmed, they would be honored as the king of the monkeys. They called out for this challenge 3 times, and on the 3rd time, the stone monkey leapt out of the crowd and said with his loudest voice, "I'll go in." And with courage in his heart and determination in his mind, he closed his eyes, crouched, and jumped straight into the waterfall. As it turns out, there was some sort of heaven-sent construction already in there, such as a bridge, and it was all a lovely, empty, very cool place. So after looking around, he returned outside of the waterfall and urged the rest of the monkeys to follow him inside and establish the Water Curtain Cave as their new home, free from the elements, other animals, and the whims of heaven. As the over 40,000 monkeys began to jump around and settle into their new home, the stone monkey solemnly took a seat above them and asked if they would honor their word and were serious about making him their king, which they immediately agreed to. And so it was that the stone monkey would do away with the word stone in his name and instead dub himself the Monkey King, specifically the Handsome Monkey King. About 300 or 400 years later, the Handsome Monkey King suddenly grew sad and shed some tears. When the other monkeys asked him what was wrong, he replied by admitting that he was saddened by thinking about the fact that everyone will one day die and be taken into the underworld, which in Chinese mythology is ruled by the Death King known as Yama. Some recounts of Journey to the West say that this was because one of Wukong's closest friend monkeys had passed away. While he was sitting there pondering the sad end of all life, another of his monkeys popped up and told the Monkey King that there existed immortals in the land, which piqued his interest, and the next day, determined to figure out the secret behind this immortality and escape the grasp of King Yama, he set out from Flower Fruit Mountain alone on a raft, and eventually arrived at the coast of the continent of Jambudvipa, which is one of the 4 continents in Buddhism, but in reality might have been the peninsula of Thailand, although that's up for debate, where he met a group of humans for the first time. They tried to run away, being afraid of his appearance, but the curious Monkey King caught one of them and took his clothes, wearing them on himself in order to mimic the humans that he saw. For the next 8 to 9 years, he wandered westbound through cities and towns and marketplaces, learning human speech and human mannerisms until he reached the western border of the continent and once again built a raft and traveled across the next sea to the western continent of Aparagadanya. After wandering around a mountain that he found in a jungle, he came across a woodsman singing about an immortal that he had met. This prompted the Monkey King to ask the woodsman where he might find the nearby immortal, which the woodcutter revealed to him. The Monkey King then successfully found this immortal, known as the Patriarch Bodhi, deep within the woods inside a sealed cave, where the Patriarch taught students Buddhist sermons and Taoist practices. After meeting the monkey and hearing that the monkey's parents were heaven and earth themselves, and hearing that he had no actual name, the Patriarch then decided to give the monkey a religious name, using the surname of Sun, which is a decently common surname in China that pretty much just means descendant or surname, and the personal name Wukong, which means aware of or awakened to the void. It is here under his first master that Sun Wukong first achieved immortality. He successfully learned martial arts, the cloud somersault jump, which is his signature method of transportation to this day, and the way of immortality by way of the 72 transformations. Which, by the way, in reality doesn't really mean 72 specific transformations. It actually most likely means infinite transformations, since back in the day they didn't have the symbol for infinity when the novel was being written, and the number 72 just so happens to be the multiple of the numbers 8 and 9, which are both core spiritual values of Buddhism. So in other words, he could transform into literally anything. However, one day, after living with the Patriarch's congregation for about 6 or 7 years, Wukong was caught showing off his powers to the other students, which the Patriarch had forbidden him to do, and therefore banished him from his congregation. Out of fear that one day Wukong would show off to the wrong people and either place himself in danger or lead unwanted attention back to the Patriarch, the Master also made Wukong swear that he would never reveal to a single soul where he learned these teachings from, which Wukong swore to, and never once in his entire long life did he break this promise. After this, Wukong used his new cloud somersault and returned to his home of Flower Fruit Mountain, where he discovered that in his 20 years of absence, his monkeys had been being stolen away by the Demon King of Confusion, which angers the Handsome Monkey King, leading him to confront the Demon King and subsequently use his hair duplication power to kill him along with all of his minions, freeing the monkeys and taking the Demon King's scimitar for himself. Before too long though, Wukong realizes that he doesn't like this weapon, and after his monkey chiefs informed him that the very nearby Dragon King of the Eastern Sea, Ao Guang, has a bounty of treasures, many of which are weapons, he decides immediately to pay the Dragon King a visit, who reluctantly agrees to quote-unquote give Wukong his neighbor immortal a weapon, though in reality he was planning on presenting to him weapons that were far too heavy for the little 4-foot-tall monkey and therefore would turn him away. So they first brought out a 9-pronged fork, which Wukong tries out and then puts back saying it's too light, which Ao Guang responds by nervously laughing and states that it weighs 4,700 pounds, but Wukong doubles down by saying it doesn't suit his hand. Becoming a little bit afraid now, but still determined to break Wukong's determination, Ao Guang has his people then bring out a giant halberd, which weighs a massive 9,500 pounds. Wukong snatched it up and tried it out a bit, and then stabbed it back into the ground, saying it was still way too light. At this point, Ao Guang was completely unnerved and resorted to just claiming that they now did not even have a weapon that would be heavy enough for the monkey, which Wukong responds to by laughing and just saying, "Nah, you're lying though, go on and bring me something else." After this, Ao Guang's wife and daughter advised him that the ancient magic iron rod, known as the Ruyi Jingubang, or in other words, the compliant golden hooped rod, at the depth of the heavenly river had been glowing the past few days, which might be a sign that they should lead Wukong to it, if anything just to get him out of their palace to stop bothering them. So they did exactly that. And even though the giant iron pillar that had been used in times immemorial by Yu the Great in order to measure the depth of the world flood weighed a staggering 17,800 pounds and was as thick as a barrel, Wukong still lifted it with some effort and said that its weight was okay, but the only problem now was that it was just too big, which, to everyone's surprise, resulted in the Ruyi Jingubang responding to and shrinking at Wukong's command. Hence the word compliant in the rod's name. Overjoyed, Wukong discovered that he could easily store the incredibly powerful rod in his ear by shrinking it down to the size of a toothpick, and proceeded to terrify the Dragon King and everyone surrounding him by swinging the weapon around in mock combat. And just to reiterate, nobody thought 17,800 pounds was a little amount. I mean, I don't care if you're an immortal, getting hit with something that weighs just shy of 9 tons being swung at your face is gonna hurt. Anyway, after this, everyone returned to the Eastern Dragon Palace. But before Wukong left, he decided to ask the king for one more favor: some clothes that would suit his new godlike weapon. The now scared to death Ao Guang just wanted Wukong gone, so he repeatedly said he had no clothes for the monkey, which actually was true. But Wukong once again called the king a liar, since the last time the king told him he didn't have something, turns out he actually had the perfect thing, and then even threatened to use his rod on him if he could not produce him some clothes, which is something that Wukong will come to regret. At this point, Ao Guang called for his 3 brothers, the Dragon Kings of the other seas, which I already spoke about much earlier in the video, and they each produced Wukong's iconic armor pieces that we already talked about. After which, Wukong left the palace and returned joyfully to Flower Fruit Mountain, where he brandished his new big rod and showcased not only its ability to grow, but his own ability to grow the size of a mountain, with the iron rod reaching from heaven to hell, the sight of which caused all animals and Yaoguais to be so afraid of Sun Wukong that they immediately surrendered their loyalties to the handsome Monkey King. Oh, and also he had casually stolen an entire city's worth of weapons so that his monkeys could also arm themselves and train in the ways of combat, you know, just in case someone were to try something. Meaning that not only was Sun Wukong immensely powerful, his monkeys were also an entire army at this point. Having really not a care in the world and feeling rather omnipotent, Wukong then proceeded to just travel the world. He visited every mountain and every sea, meeting heroes and warriors and making lots of friends. But among all of those he met, there were 6 other mighty Yaoguais most alike to himself, with which he established a fraternal alliance as sworn brothers called the 7 Sages, the most famous and powerful of which was the Bull Demon King. Also, the Macaque King that appears in Chapter 3 was one of these sages. The 7 sages would meet every day to discuss matters and also to partay, but one day after a grand banquet, the other 6 Yaoguais left and Wukong fell asleep underneath a pine tree. In his dream, 2 men approached him and tied him up, dragging his soul down to the underworld, which was actually his soul being dragged down to the underworld while he was asleep. Wukong then came to his senses, realizing this was probably more than a dream when they approached the City of Darkness and asked his captors why they were there, since, you know, he's an immortal now and shouldn't be dying, but they didn't respond, which angered Wukong and led to him whipping out his big rod and killing his 2 captors. After this, he literally fights his way through the City of Darkness and right up to the 10 kings of the underworld, who were frightened at this angry monkey's show of power. He demanded to know why he was being, killed, and the 10 kings responded by saying, oh, it could have been a mistake. Wukong then demanded to see the ledger of births and deaths and found his name inside, which read correctly that he was the heaven-born stone monkey, sentenced to die. He then demanded a brush, which the judge gave him, and proceeded in front of the 10 kings of death to mark out his name from the ledger of death, as well as all of the names of his monkeys on Flower Fruit Mountain, granting himself yet another layer of immortality, as well as immortality for all of his monkeys. After he was done casually bullying the gods of death, he fought his way out of the city until he suddenly tripped and then found himself jolting back up awake underneath the pine tree, back on Mount Huaguo. Then he told his monkeys what had happened and what he had done for them, and then they all partied again. He then decided to appoint his 4 greatest friends as his chiefs, one of which was the Mandrill, his oldest friend, leading to her now being known as the Mandrill Chief. Meanwhile, the Dragon Kings, who were still pretty angry about the way they were treated by the Monkey King, decided to lodge a formal complaint about said monkey directly to the Jade Emperor himself, and at the same time, one of the Kings of Death decided to do the exact same thing, leading to the Jade Emperor receiving 2 formal complaints about this dastardly monkey who just bullies people into getting his way from 2 very respected gods of the world. The Emperor responded by promising to arrest Wukong, but before he could order anyone to do so, the celestial being known as Taibai Jinxing, or in other words the Gold Star of Venus, intercepted the arrest and asked the Jade Emperor to show mercy on the monkey, instead suggesting that they offer Sun Wukong a place in the heavenly court amongst the other celestials in order to peacefully keep an eye on him, while also quenching his desire for status and power. The Jade Emperor saw the wisdom in this and agreed, and the Gold Star left to meet and summon Wukong to return with him to heaven. Wukong was ecstatic to be invited, and the 2 of them soon arrived in heaven and stood before the Jade Emperor, surrounded by various divine officials and gods. Every word Wukong spoke, though, was completely ignorant of court etiquette and caused pretty much everyone to hate him immediately, even though he didn't necessarily mean any ill will. Also because of the fact that he's a monkey, and people typically don't like monkeys. Regardless, the Emperor then announced Wukong as the new official protector of the horses, which was essentially just a fancy name they came up with for a stable boy, the lowest rank in heaven. Not that Wukong knew that yet. He was initially very happy about his new assignment and took great care of the 1,000 heavenly horses for over half a month. But one morning, some other court ministers came by to throw a little banquet for Wukong as congratulations, since they were all office buddies now. While they were all eating and drinking happily, the Monkey King eagerly asked, "So what sort of a rank is this protector of the horses position of mine?" To which they responded that it doesn't actually have a rank because it's really the lowest of the low. They had no idea that Wukong didn't know this, and he had no idea that everyone was looking down on him. So naturally, this made him kind of incredibly angry, claiming that he was a king in his mountain. So how dare they trick him into such a lowly position? And with that, he summoned his large rod and destroyed the stables, releasing all of the horses across heaven, then storming out and flying back to his mountain, kicking off an event known as the Havoc in Heaven. Back in Mount Huaguo, Wukong discovered that each day in heaven is an entire year on Earth. So even though he had only been gone for about half a month, to his monkeys over 10 years had passed. As he was reintegrating with his monkeys and explaining what happened to some of the demon kings that followed him, they sympathized with his feelings and told him that since he has such great divine powers, he should actually be called the Great Sage, equal to heaven. And so it was that Wukong officially proclaimed himself the title of the Great Sage equal to heaven and wrote it in large letters on a flag outside his cave. And mind you, titles and names were incredibly important, not only to ancient China, but also to the heavenly court. You can't just go around calling yourself the Big Cheese if the court doesn't call you the Big Cheese first, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, the next day in heaven, as the Jade Emperor held court, it was reported to him that Wukong essentially threw a gigantic tantrum and broke the stables and then left his post in a fit of rage, which led to the Jade Emperor officially asking Li Jing, another very famous warrior god in Chinese mythology known for bearing a pagoda in his hand with the ability to capture anyone, as well as Li Jing's third son, Prince Neja, who is another incredibly famous Chinese mythological hero who, as a side note, is hopefully gonna get his own Black Myth game in the future, to both go forth and subdue the problematic Monkey King. After they had assembled a celestial army which included the gigantic river deity Erlang Shen, they then descended to the earth and the first official battle between Wukong and heaven began. Erlang Shen first approached Wukong's mountain and demanded his monkeys send him out to meet him in battle, calling him by his lowly title, the Horse Keeper, in order to anger the self-proclaimed Great Sage equal to heaven. Wukong emerges from his cave in response to being summoned by the Blue Giant, and the two share some dialogue that I actually really like. Erlang Shen asks Wukong if he recognizes him, to which Wukong responds by literally saying, "Are you stupid? We've never met." Erlang then commands Wukong to take off his armor and surrender, and if he even utters half of the word no, he will be reduced to powder in seconds. To which Wukong responds by calling Erlang a simpleton, again, and telling him to just shut up, saying he would have killed him in a single hit from his iron rod already, but he spared him because he needs someone to communicate his message back to the Jade Emperor, informing the Supreme God that he doesn't know good talent when he sees it. I just really like how ballsy Wukong is. Anyway, the two of them fight and Wukong very easily beats Erlang back, even breaking his giant axe in the process, telling Erlang to go back and inform the Jade Emperor that he needs to promote Wukong to a title worthy of being called the Great Sage equal to heaven. Otherwise, he will fight his way to the throne directly. And you better believe that he meant it. After the Blue Giant retreated back to camp in defeat, Neja himself decided to face Wukong in combat. And after some more choice, very taunting words were exchanged, such as Neja threatening Wukong with his sword and the monkey responding by saying quite literally, "Go ahead, little baby boy, take your best shot." The two of them fought for much longer now since Neja was a closer match for the Monkey King. However, after both of them displayed enormous amounts of power and fought for over 30 rounds, Wukong pulled a fast one and struck Neja on the shoulder from behind with a crippling blow from his rod that once again weighed 17,800 pounds, which sent the third prince fleeing back to camp in pain and defeat, which led to both Lingji and Neja returning to heaven to report, ending the first battle. Wukong returned to his mountain quite pleased with his victory, having beaten back two of the Celestial Court's strongest warriors with relative ease. The 7 sages assembled once more and, at this point, fueled by his cocky attitude and firmly believing himself to be the great sage equal to heaven, Wukong urged his fellow mighty Yaoguai brothers to call themselves great sages as well, which they all did, with the Bull King, who for all intents and purposes is every bit as powerful as Wukong, naming himself the great sage parallel to heaven, which is essentially the same title as Wukong's. Meanwhile, Li Jing and his son returned to the Jade Emperor and reported that Wukong was pretty frickin' powerful, and because of this, it might be in everyone's best interest to just, give him the promotion he wants. Otherwise, who knows what this monkey and all of his powerful Yaoguai friends are really capable of. The Emperor was initially resistant to this idea, but once again, the Gold Star of Venus came forward and convinced the Emperor to just go along with the more peaceful option, which, to be fair, is literally just to officially acknowledge the title of Great Sage equal to heaven for Wukong, without also giving him any further role or rank or responsibility. Pretty much just an empty title to pacify the Mad Monkey, who would also then again be invited to live in heaven with the rest of the Celestials so that they could keep tabs on him. Once again, the Emperor agreed to this plan, and once again, the Gold Star was sent down to fetch Wukong, who received his guest rather graciously, and even thanked the Gold Star for showing such kindness to him after he did cause heaven so much trouble. The two of them returned to the Jade Emperor, who did in fact administer the official title of Great Sage equal to heaven upon Wukong, under the condition that Wukong would stop being so problematic. The Great Sage happily accepted and was given a mansion to live in, and for a time, things were rather peaceful. Wukong had not a care in the world and did what he loved doing, traveling here and there throughout the heavens, making friends, learning, eating, drinking, sleeping, the life. One day, however, as the Jade Emperor held court, it was reported to him by some other Celestials that the Great Sage had just been dawdling away his time doing nothing of importance at all. And there was a growing worry amongst all the other ministers that he would possibly become mischievous once again due to all this boredom. The Emperor saw their reasoning and sent for Wukong at once and decided to give him his first official new assignment, telling him to, instead of being the caretaker for the horses once again, be the caretaker of the legendary Garden of Immortal Peaches, at least for now. In case you didn't know, the Garden of Immortal Peaches produced the aptly named Peaches of Immortality, which are quite famous in Chinese mythology as they're normally consumed by the immortals in order to lengthen their lives, with each individual peach being said to grant 3,000 years of life to their consumers. And given that that's 3,000 years in heaven, and each day in heaven is equal to 1 year in earth, you get the picture. And there are different kinds of immortal peaches too. Out of the 3,600 total peach trees in the garden, the first 1,200 produce peaches every 3,000 years that will each grant its consumer lean, strong bodies. The second 1,200 produce peaches every 6,000 years that grant their consumers the ability to fly and enjoy eternal youth. And the final 1,200 trees in the back of the garden produce the most potent peaches every 9,000 years, that each make their consumer, quote, as eternal as heaven and earth, as long-lived as the sun and moon. The Monkey King was delighted at his new job and ran immediately to the garden to inspect the place, excited to get to work. He diligently cared for the garden day after day and was so focused on his job that he no longer meandered to and fro, and no longer saw his friends that he was previously spending all of his time with. One day, as he was inspecting the garden, he noticed that more than half of the 9,000-year peaches on the trees in the back of the garden were nice and ripe, and he very much so wanted to try just one. So he told his entourage of helper immortals to go wait for him outside the garden while he took a nice nap inside the garden, which they obeyed since he was their boss after all. After they left, Wukong climbed up into a tree and ate not just one, not just two, but as many as his heart desired. And as a reminder, these were the once every 9,000 year peaches that would make you as old as the heaven and earth themselves. So yeah, it's safe to say Wukong successfully achieved yet another layer of immortality. And then some. And since he got away with it once, he did it again and again every few days until he had eaten nearly all of the 9,000 year peaches. One day, while Wukong was taking a nap on one of the branches of the peach trees in a magically shrunken form so that nobody could find him, the Queen Mother of the West decided to host the Grand Festival of Immortal Peaches, which required immortal peaches. So she sent her 7 immortal maidens to the Immortal Peach Garden to fetch immortal peaches. They couldn't find the keeper of the garden anywhere, so they decided to just go ahead and start harvesting. When they got to the trees at the back of the garden though, they found that they were all completely empty of any peaches, except for a few unripened ones that they couldn't pluck anyway. However, there just so happened to be one left, which just so happened to be attached to the very branch that the mini Wukong was sleeping on. When the maidens plucked the peach, the branch bent down and then snapped back into place like branches do, startling the great sage, who woke up at once and whipped out his big rod, threatening the maidens for stealing his peaches. They explained the situation though, and the need for peaches since the Queen Mother was throwing the Grand Peach Festival, which pretty much every immortal ever was invited to. Wukong immediately calmed down and was delighted at the idea of such a festival and asked them if he was also invited, since he was the grand great sage equal to heaven, to which they responded that they weren't sure since everyone knew Wukong was just the garden tender and not a real member of the heavenly immortals. At that point, since this is the second time this happened, something kind of snapped in Wukong. And he used the immobilize magic to transfix the maidens in one place and set off to figure out a way into the banquet that he wasn't invited to, which he was able to do by lying to the barefoot immortal that was on his way to the banquet and telling him that he instead had to go check in at the faraway Hall of Bright Lights for a rehearsal before the banquet. And after successfully deceiving the barefoot immortal, Wukong assumed his appearance and entered the banquet stealthily, where he discovered that he was early and none of the other immortals had arrived just yet. So he proceeded to magically transform some of his hairs into sleep-inducing insects, which put all of the staff and stewards to sleep, while he stole and drank his absolute fill of the celestial wine and feasted on all the celestial foods. However, after he was thoroughly drunk, he had a fleeting sober moment and thought to himself, you know what, I should probably leave because I'll probably get in trouble if the others find me when they arrive. So he tried to go home but was too drunk and instead stumbled his way to Tushita Palace. Yes, the very same Tushita Palace that I mentioned in the previous video where Lao Tzu and Rakshasa and the Keeper of the Flaming Mountains are from. Seeing as he had never gotten the chance to meet the famed Lao Tzu, and still being drunk out of his mind, he pushed his way in and, to his surprise, found the palace completely empty, since at the time Lao Tzu was off somewhere giving a lecture. The drunk monkey then found his way into Lao Tzu's lab, where he created the pills of immortality, which the immortals of heaven would eat in order to achieve, you guessed it, immortality. There were 5 entire gourds full of these pills, which Wukong decided to, you guessed it, steal and eat all of, achieving yet another layer of immortality and then some. However, once the final pill was eaten, their magical effects snapped Wukong out of his drunken state of mind, where he at once became so worried about inciting the murderous wrath of the Jade Emperor that he not only escaped the palace, but heaven itself, abandoned his post yet again and returned to his home of Flowerfruit Mountain, where he once again discovered that he had been gone for over a century's worth of time on Earth. And after a quick return to the banquet in heaven to steal another 4 bottles of celestial wine, he and his monkeys enjoyed a nice evening celebrating his return and drinking the wine of the immortals. Now, remember those maidens that he left immobilized in the garden? They remained that way until an entire heavenly day later, when the immobilization spell finally let up, and they returned at once to the Queen Mother, to whom they explained everything that had happened. One thing led to another, and reports from the Queen Mother, from Lao Tzu, and from the Barefoot Immortal himself regarding everything Wukong had done the previous day, led the Jade Emperor to be consumed with anger and finally say that enough is enough. And he then officially sentenced the troublesome stone monkey to death, with peace no longer being an option. This time, Li Jing, Neja, the entirety of the 28 constellation deities, and dozens upon dozens of other incredibly powerful gods, including the 4 heavenly kings themselves, assembled alongside 100,000 celestial sorters. 100,000 celestial soldiers in order to once again bring the fight to Mount Huaguo in hopes of bringing the great sage to justice, which began the second great battle of Wukong versus the forces of heaven. Wukong easily defeated the first group of 9 luminary deities that came knocking, which prompted Li Jing to order the 4 heavenly kings themselves alongside all 28 constellations to fight Wukong next, which he was entirely unimpressed with and casually commanded his Yaoguai forces to meet them in battle. However, the Yaoguais that joined up with Wukong were all taken captive by the forces of heaven, leaving only Wukong and his monkeys remaining, while the monkey himself was in midair doing solo battle against all 4 heavenly kings, Li Jing, and Prince Neja at the same time, a battle which lasted the entire day. When the evening approached, Wukong duplicated himself into thousands of great sages and soundly defeated Neja as well as all 5 heavenly kings, leading them to retreat and ending the battle for that day. The following day though, Bodhisattva Guanyin just so happened to stop by heaven, and upon being educated of the situation, sent her disciple Moksha, Li Jing's second son and Neja's older brother, to go and assess the battle situation against Wukong. He ended up trying his hand against the Monkey King, but is also soundly defeated. And when he reports back to Guanyin in heaven, she suggests to the rather exasperated Jade Emperor that the person they really need to get a hold of to take care of their monkey problem is a legendary fighter known as Erlang Shen, the god-nephew of the Jade Emperor, who the Jade Emperor had once sentenced to death. Though she admits that they should make sure to offer him this special assignment only, as he is way too prideful to respond to any general summons. So they do just that, and Erlang and his band of 6 Plum Mountain brothers accept the bounty placed on Wukong's head and at once ride off to the battlefield, where Erlang provides details for capturing the stone monkey. Once all of the plans were made, the heavenly kings and celestial soldiers all surrounded Wukong's mountain, while Erlang, his trusty dog Zhaotian, and his mighty Plum brothers went forward to provoke battle. As Erlang and Wukong exchanged taunting words, Wukong admitted that he knew of the reputation of the boy who cleaved open an entire mountain with an axe, but that did very little to dissuade him from engaging in combat. The two of them fought for well over 300 rounds, seemingly completely evenly matched, their battle even leading to the two of them supersizing to the height of mountains, with Erlang taking the form of a green-skinned, red-maned lion, causing quite the spectacle, to say the very least. However, while Wukong was busy with Erlang, the Plum brothers defeated all of his monkeys and caused them to flee and scatter, and when Wukong glanced back and saw this, the novel states that his heart grew faint. For the first time, the Monkey King felt real, genuine fear, and it was not for his own fate, but for the fate of the monkeys that he swore to protect. In an effort to lead the fight away from his people, he immediately, and for the first time in his life, shrunk back down, turned tail, and ran away as fast as he could. At this point, he and Erlang go through an entire sequence of a cat and mouse chase, through many different transformations, where Wukong would change form into some animal or object to hide away from Erlang, who keeps discovering him in different forms himself, like the elite god-feared hunter that he is. Eventually though, he was chased down and the two began fighting yet again, with all 6 Plum brothers joining the fight this time as well. And meanwhile, Guanyin up in heaven spoke to Lao Tzu regarding methods to end this madness. Lao Tzu then decided that he would hurl his magical armlet known as the Diamond Jade Ring at Wukong directly in order to hopefully give Erlang the upper hand. And there's a lot of lore and powers behind this Diamond Jade Ring, but we won't get into that at this point. Ultimately, Lao Tzu did indeed chuck it down literally from the heavens with extreme accuracy, clocking Wukong right in the head, catching him unguarded and toppling him over. He got up and tried to run, but then was bitten in the leg by Zhao Chan, Erlang's dog, which knocked him down again and was the final nail in the coffin for the troublesome monkey. The rest of the Plum brothers immediately pinned him down and tied him up. Wukong was then delivered to heaven to be executed, and Erlang and his brothers made sure to burn Wukong's mountain, killing the vast majority of the 40,000 monkeys. In turn, they were congratulated, rewarded, and returned to their home. The great sage was immediately bound to the monster execution pillar, where they tried to kill him by slashing him with a heavenly scimitar, striking him with an axe, stabbing him with a spear, and hacking at him with a sword. But his incredibly immortal body was impervious to all damage. When the Jade Emperor heard that nobody could harm even a single hair on Wukong's head, he was once again puzzled as to how to even kill this damn monkey. And then Lao Tzu came forward, being something of a scientist himself, and suggested that they place Wukong within his 8-trigram brazier to be smelted away to nothingness and ash. So they did just that and pushed him into the brazier. But even this did not kill the crafty monkey, since he hid underneath the wind sign where there was no fire, only smoke. However, over the next 49 days that he was left inside the brazier, he wasn't burned by fire, but the smoke caused so much disturbance to Wukong's eyes, causing him to rub them and cry the entire time, but eventually smelting them and giving them a permanently red, inflamed look that enabled him to have the power to see through evil and trickery, referred to as Wukong's fiery eyes and diamond pupils. On the 49th day, Lao Tzu finally opened the brazier to check on Wukong, and he leapt straight out, shoving the old Taoist over and fiercely fighting harder than ever before to make his way straight to the Jade Emperor, with blood on his mind. At this point, the Supreme Inspector, Numinous Officer Wang, decided he had to stop Wukong from reaching his liege the Emperor. So he clashed in combat against the fearsome Monkey King, halting him, while the 36 Thunder Deities also joined the fight. At this point though, everyone knew that there was no stopping this incredibly powerful monkey, so the Jade Emperor instead sent word to the Buddha, as in the Buddha, also known as Tathagata, within Thunderclap Temple to the west, asking for help in subduing Wukong. Tathagata came at once to the Hall of Divine Mists, where he witnessed firsthand the great sage fighting against all 36 Thunder Deities and Numinous Officer Wang. Tathagata then spoke, stopping the fight, and challenged the still mad but also pretty curious Wukong to a test in order to earn not just his freedom, but the throne of the Jade Emperor himself if he could pass this test. But if he lost, he would have to return to the earth as a monster. The challenge was simple: just jump free of the Buddha's hand. Wukong thought that that was just as ridiculous as it sounded, so he started from Tathagata's hand, accepted the challenge, and in an instant somersaulted into the clouds, traveling all the way to what he believed the edge of the world was, where he eventually came across 5 giant pink pillars. Assuming that this was the edge of existence, he went to the middle pillar, wrote in black ink the symbols meaning the great sage equal to heaven has made a tour of this place, just in case nobody believed him, and then took a leak at the base of the pillar, just, to show him and mark his territory. He then flew back and smugly announced from the hand of Tathagata that he should now receive the Jade Emperor's throne. But then, Tathagata pushed his anime glasses up against his nose and asked, "Since when did you ever leave the palm of my hand?" Wukong was confused and looked down and saw his writing on the middle finger of the Buddha, and then realized that the Buddha had used his power to shrink Wukong down and trick him into thinking he was flying through the air far away, when in reality he was just teeny tiny in the hand of Buddha this whole time. And when Wukong realized this, he hastily tried to escape, but Tathagata then flung him out of heaven and transformed his fingers into a giant mountain, known as the 5 Phases Mountain, which crashed on top of Wukong and pinned him down, completely immobilizing the monkey except for his head sticking out on the bottom, and finally subduing the great sage equal to heaven. Wukong remained here for 500 years as punishment, and when he was thirsty, the earth spirits would give him molten copper to drink, and when he was hungry, he would be given iron pellets to eat, which is every bit as pleasant as it sounds. Now, at this point, Guan Yin, who is known for her mercy, convinced Wukong, who now had moss and grass grown all over his face, of a chance to earn back not only his freedom, but also his merit and then some by assisting with a scripture pilgrim who would be traveling soon from the east to the west in order to obtain Buddhist sutras from the Thunderclap Temple. And that scripture pilgrim turned out to be Jin Chanza, also known as Monk Tang Sunzang, who I've talked about several times in these videos. After Sunzang was given his mission, he went to Wukong and removed the seal on the mountain, which allowed Wukong to crack the mountain open in order to free himself. He had once pledged his loyalty to the monk, but after he killed some robbers on their way to the west who were trying to harm his master, Sunzang harshly scolded Wukong for his violence, which resulted in the very offended Wukong flying away to his old pal Ao Guang, the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea. This time though, Ao Guang used a story to convince Wukong to just stick it out, so that he could earn his merit back, even if he feels like he's being mistreated. And being convinced, the monkey decided to return to his new master. Meanwhile though, Guan Yin met with Sunzang and gave him a silk shirt and cap to trick Wukong into wearing, as inside this cap was the infamous gold circlet, which, when the tightening mantra was recited, would squeeze the head of its wearer, causing unbearable pain. Wukong returned to Sunzang, who successfully tricked him into putting on the shirt and cap. And after confirming that the spell worked, and Wukong had no choice but to obey and never again even think about leaving, the two of them set off on the mythical journey to the west. And along the way they met Jubaja, Sha Wujing, added them to their party, and completed no fewer than 81 trials throughout the entire journey, which is what the vast majority of the novel is dedicated to, which I will not be covering here because this video is already super long. I will mention though that Wukong's path crossed with Erlang and the Plum Boys one more time though, which was fortunate for the monkey since he needed help subduing the 9-headed bird Yaoguai that had almost killed Jubaja, which Erlang was happy to help with. His dog Zhao-chan actually bit off one of the bird's heads, causing it to flee, and to this day mythological legends state that it still bleeds from its decapitated head. It's also interesting to note that at this point, Wukong refers to Erlang as his sworn brother, which implies they had been on good terms for quite some time and no enmity existed between them. There was also another occasion in the novel that details the group repeatedly lured by a demoness known as the White Bone Demon or Lady Whitebone, who appeared before the group 3 times in disguise as innocent people. But Wukong, being able to see through her disguise with his fiery eyes, slew her every time, which actually led to Sunzang once again scolding Wukong and actually temporarily banishing Wukong out of rage, incorrectly believing him to have killed innocent people. I brought this up because it's heavily implied in the game and also other sorts of media that there was actually more to this encounter than we read about in the original novel. According to the ending of the game, Lady Whitebone was actually Wukong's one and only love interest, which we can confirm in the ending animation, and he had to kill her repeatedly in order to save his master, once again proving his dedicated loyalty. After all of the 81 trials were complete and the sutras were successfully delivered back to the east, Sunzang and his entire party returned to the Thunderclap Temple to receive their rewards from the Buddha. Sunzang himself was made into a Buddha, as well as Sun Wukong, who was called the Victorious Fighting Buddha. And right as the novel ends, it is said that his golden headband that was used to control him finally disappeared. But we know now that this was a lie. According to the lore of the game, Wukong and Bajia, who was not made into a Buddha but was still given a position atop Mount Lingshan, lived together atop the Holy Mount and seemingly had not a care in the world. But there was still something that was bothering the great sage. In fact, one evening while the two of them were drinking their cares away, they engaged in a conversation regarding whether or not they ever actually had free will and the respect of the court, which confused the drunken Jubaja, who was more than happy to simply exist and drink and eat for the rest of his days. But, you see, Wukong never actually did any of the journey to the west for himself. He had already achieved incredible powers and immortality so many times over that nobody in heaven could figure out how to beat or actually kill him. According to the Chapter 5 ending animation, the only reason he sought a position among the Buddha was to liberate the idea of his monkeys or Yaoguais in general being lesser beings or evil to those in the celestial court. He wanted to bring peace and safety to his fellow beasts of the earth and his Yaoguai sage brothers such as the Bull King. But he came to realize slowly but surely that, after everything he had done, Heaven was never actually interested in leaving the Yaoguais alone, only in their submission and obedience, starting with the stone monkey, the most powerful Yaoguai to ever live. He also discovered, to this point, that the headband never actually left his head. It was only made to disappear to trick him once again into thinking he had free will. And it may have even been Erlang himself that revealed this terrifying truth to him, as we can hear in the final ending animation. At this point, Wukong finally had no choice but to realize that there was no way that headband would ever be removed from his head, at least not while he was alive. And so it was that Wukong conspired along with his sworn brother Erlang, who I will remind you also had plenty of reason to hate the Celestial Court for not only their treatment of others and himself, but for their treatment of his own mother, to devise a plan to remove the headband from Wukong's head once and for all, that nobody knew the truth of except for Wukong, Erlang, and the Buddha Maitreya. And this plan, known as the Black Myth, began something like this. Wukong left the heavens in defiance once again, which prompted the Heavenly Court to once again wage a war against the Monkey King. But this time, since their patience had long since evaporated for this foolish monkey, even though he was a Buddha, they started by cruelly slaughtering his remaining monkeys and Yaoguais that were under his care. According to the Black Bear Guai's journal entry, Bodhisattva Guanyin once again became involved and tasked the most mighty fighter she could find with killing the great sage once and for all, promising each of them a great reward from the monkey's remains if they were successful. And those fighters were the Black Bear Guai, the Yellow Wind Sage, Monk Yellowbrow, the 100-eyed Taoist Master, and two of Wukong's sworn brothers, the Bull King and Erlang Shen, who all together devised another plan to secretly ambush the Monkey King, although none of them knew about Erlang's already existing secret plan to aid Wukong. After all of Heaven's preparations were complete, the fateful day to finally kill the stone monkey arrived, and they assembled a familiar force of the mighty colossal river god Erlang Shen, the 4 heavenly kings, and 100,000 other celestial soldiers, led by Erlang Shen and his dog Zhaoqian to meet Wukong in battle, which is the very scene that opens up the game. After a brief moment to collect himself, knowing what must be done, Wukong took one last gaze across the leftover remains of all of his friends, who had each either left him or had been killed at this point, left his cave for the last time, mounted his somersault cloud, and met the celestial forces in battle. After an exchange of words, with Wukong once again insinuating that his only real problems with Heaven were that they would never allow him or his monkeys to just exist in peace, Erlang forbade anyone else from engaging in combat with Wukong, and the two of them began fighting. Just like their first fight, Wukong shapeshifted to flee, but Guanyin, who was presumably watching the fight from heaven above, recanted the tightening mantra once again, proving that the headband was never really removed from Wukong's head and giving Erlang the upper hand to stab Wukong in the chest and plummet him down to the top of Mount Huaguo, where the other Yaoguais were waiting to ambush the monkey. And here, at the very same spot where the monkey made of a divine stone was born and first learned to run and climb trees and see the world for himself, after a fight against the most powerful Yaoguai kings in the world, a host of celestial soldiers, and the god Erlang Shen, he was finally killed and breathed his last in the arms of his brother, the Bull King. Heaven was finally rid of their monkey problem, or so they believed. Because you see, both plans were accomplished that day. Guanyin's heavenly charged Yaoguai team successfully killed the Monkey King, and as Erlang dismembered Wukong's body, each received one of his 6 powerful relics as a reward, after which Wukong's body turned back into the divine stone egg from which it came. Each of the Yaoguai kings went on to attempt to use said relics for their own gains, except for the Bull King, who heeded his brother's dying warnings and simply hid his relic away. And if you'd like more information on each of these Yaoguai kings, please see their corresponding chapter videos on the channel. But after the Yaoguais had left, Erlang secretly took the 6th and most important relic, Wukong's mind, and hid it away in his own third eye. This act was actually seen by a couple of the nearby celestial soldiers, and after the fight, while they remained on the mountain killing any monkeys who were still alive, they noticed some strange plum blossoms blossoming on the mountain. Just as they plucked some and asked each other how they came to grow on Mount Huaguo, they were assassinated quietly by Erlang, forever burying the secret of Wukong's 6th relic. At this point, all that was left for Erlang's plan was to trust that one of the destined descendants from Wukong, born from one of Wukong's divine hairs and wearing no golden headband, would take up the mantle of reclaiming Wukong's relics from each of the Yaoguai kings that possessed them, with every defeat becoming more and more similar to the powerful Monkey King of legend. Erlang then partnered with Maitreya to hide away within a painted world along with the 4 heavenly kings, where he would protect Wukong's mind from the rest of the world. And before he hid himself away, he entrusted his Plum Mountain brothers with seeking out the Destined One and guiding him on his way to uncover the secret of Erlang's location. At this point, we, the player, the Destined One, fight our way through each chapter, reclaiming Wukong's relics one by one and meeting Erlang's brothers, who each serve as a test to the Destined One's growing strength and provide a key to solving Erlang's puzzle, culminating finally in discovering Erlang himself awaiting us within Maitreya's painted world of Mount Mei. Erlang initially greets the Destined One, apologizing for not offering a cup of tea, then engaging in combat as his final test for us, which, after a long battle that includes Erlang supersizing into his old green-skinned, red-maned lion form and the Destined One supersizing into that of the giant stone monkey and taking on all 4 heavenly kings all at once, brutally killing each one of them, and I mean brutally. Erlang is finally defeated, convinced of the Destined One's power, and yields the final relic, Wukong's mind, to the Destined One. And as we are obtaining the mind relic, Wukong's voice can be heard, signifying it contains his memories, his mind. Erlang then urges the Destined One to not fail Wukong, states he is now at peace, and afterwards the Destined One then returns to where it all began, the celestial stone egg atop Mount Huaguo. Along the way, as he approaches the mountaintop, various celestial soldiers begin raining down from heaven, including numinous Officer Wang, the Supreme Inspector who once fought Wukong to a standstill in an attempt to stop the Destined One, which heavily implies that the Celestial Court knew that the Destined One held all of Wukong's relics at this point and did not want yet another monkey problem on their hands. After slaying his way to the top, the Destined One then speaks with Jubaja, and the two of them enter the stone. They meet the old monkey waiting for them inside, whose true identity is still hidden to us to this day, who then leads the pair on a boat across a vast lake, littered with various mementos of Wukong's memories as he discussed the various memories with Baja, one by one, drawing connections between Wukong's personality, represented by his relics, and the Yaoguai kings that had a hand in slaying him, saying his eyes were just as greedy as the black bear guais, who had once stolen a Kasaya. His ears were just as rageful as the Yellow Wind Sage, who had once swore vengeance against the Bodhisattva Lingji. His nose just as pointed upward and disgraceful as Yellowbrow, who committed sacrilege against Buddhist teachings. His tongue just as eager to speak of his love for Lady Whitebone as the 100-Eyed Taoist and the Spider Guais. And his body just as torn between freedom and Buddhahood as the Bull King. Finally, he discusses the matter of Wukong's mind, which he very vaguely states is both lost and found, both the Destined One and not the Destined One, which makes perfect sense, but since we completed Erlang's mission, we now know the truth. Eventually, they make it to Wukong's broken shell of a body that he left soulless and relicless inside the stone egg, known as the Stone Monkey, which the Destined One must face in combat to set aside in order to merge the relics back into one inside his own new body. After defeating the Stone Monkey, however, Wukong's final trick plays out, and he rematerializes in his actual body, equipped with his actual armor and the Ruyi Jingubang Iron Rod, one last time, as one final challenge to the Destined One who would be his successor. He even takes back all of his other relics from the Destined One, but the mind of Wukong, the Destined One himself, prevails in the end, and with a final laugh, the Monkey King, who is at long last convinced that his successor will truly be his equal, if not his superior, free, finally, of the cursed golden circlet, relinquishes his relics and fades away for good, leaving behind only the golden circlet, with all relics including Wukong's mind finally merged into one and his stone shell being defeated. His memories spring to life once more within the mind of the Destined One, who is now, for all intents and purposes, none other than the great sage equal to heaven himself. And with that, the black myth of Sun Wukong comes to a close. I want to thank you all so very much for watching this series, and I also want to thank Game Science for blessing us this year with such a passionate love letter to one of the greatest mythological characters of all time. Though we're not quite done with the coverage of this game on the channel, I will be taking a little bit of a break from the game before returning to its pages. But if you would be so kind, please consider leaving a like on this video if you enjoyed it, or at least my efforts into this series, and subscribe if you haven't already if you love stories, lore, and theories as much as I do. Let me know if there was anything I missed in the comments below, and also let me know if you would like for the DLC to Black Myth Wukong to be about after these events, maybe taking the fight back to heaven, or whatever else you think it should be about. A huge thanks as always to my bandit crew, who are the entire reason I do what I do, and I think that's about it. Follow me on my socials if you would be so kind, and before I sign off, hey guys, I just wanted to say that getting to work on this has been an absolute honor. You're going to have to pardon my editor's hair that I've had. I just finished wrapping the video, but I just wanted to say I couldn't have done this without each and every one of you. I have really enjoyed getting into the lore, both from real life and from this game, and I'm going to take a break from it for a little bit, but I can't wait to return, and I can't wait to see you there. So, this is Bandit, signing out. Peace.